The night air around the small hillside cafe felt strangely heavy, as if the wind itself was holding its breath, waiting for something that had not yet been spoken. The lamps along the stone path glowed softly, their warm light falling over the wooden tables outside. Everything seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful, like the world had decided to pause just long enough for two people to choose whether to step forward or turn away forever. People whispered at nearby tables, soft clinks of cups and spoons echoed in a gentle rhythm, but none of it reached Keanu's ears. He sat there quietly, staring at his hands, feeling the weight of a moment he had carried for years pressing against his chest. No cameras, no reporters, no bright lights to hide behind. Just silence, a quiet table, and the hope that he still had the right to speak the words he had rehearsed countless times. Sandra sat across from him, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug, though she had not taken a sip in several minutes. She watched him with a kind of careful patience, the way someone watches a dear friend who seems both familiar and distant at the same time. Something about him felt different tonight, not in a bad way, but in a way that stirred an old ache inside her, the ache of things unsaid and years that had slipped by like water through her hands. She had known Keanu for so long that she could read the tiny shifts in his expression, the way his eyes softened when he cared, the way his shoulders tightened when he was hurting. Tonight, his eyes carried a quiet fear she had never seen in him before, and it made her chest tighten with a concern she could not name. He finally lifted his gaze, and when their eyes met, Sandra felt something inside her freeze. There was no smile, no polite calmness, only a depth she did not expect. She opened her mouth to ask if he was all right, but he spoke first, his voice softer than the candle flame flickering between them. "Can I ask you something?" he said, and the words trembled slightly, as if they tried to slip away before he could hold them. She nodded slowly, her heartbeat rising without reason. "Of course, you can ask me anything." Keanu swallowed, and for a moment he looked away, trying to steady himself. He had always been quiet, always thoughtful, always gentle with his words, but this felt different. It felt like the quiet before a confession that could change everything. He breathed deeply, trying to calm the storm inside him, trying to push away the fear that maybe he had waited too long, maybe life had changed them both too much, maybe she no longer saw him the way she once did. But the truth was that this moment had been waiting for him, haunting him, urging him to speak before silence stole the chance forever. "Sandra," he said, and her name left his lips with tenderness that made her lean forward without thinking. "I need to ask you something I should have asked a long time ago." Her breath caught. She felt the air shift around them, felt the tension coil like a string pulled tight. For a brief second, 100 memories flashed across her mind. Laughing beside him on set, crying on his shoulder when life became too heavy, the quiet late-night talks that stretched for hours, the way he always treated her with a respect so rare in an industry where kindness was often lost. She did not know what he was about to ask, but something in her heart whispered that this moment had been waiting for them both. "What is it?" she asked softly, though a small tremor escaped her voice. Keanu's fingers curled against the wooden table, his knuckles turning pale. He breathed deeply once more, then let the words fall out, quiet but clear. "Will you marry me?" Sandra blinked, the world around her collapsing into complete silence. No footsteps, no whispers, no sounds at all. Her heart hammered in her chest, and for a moment she wondered if she had misheard him. This was not a man who rushed into emotional decisions. This was not a man who spoke lightly. Every word he said carried a quiet sincerity. She felt the intensity of his question fill the air between them, and her breath grew uneven as the meaning settled inside her. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the years of unspoken feelings, the tenderness he had always carried but never revealed in full. He was not performing. He was not dramatic. He was simply telling her the truth he had held inside, a truth wrapped in fear, hope, and a lifetime of respect for her. "Keanu," she whispered, but her voice cracked before she could continue. Emotions swirled inside her, shock, confusion, fear, but also a warmth she had not felt in years. She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to steady her heartbeat as a deep ache rose from somewhere she had buried long ago. He leaned forward slightly, his voice trembling. "I know this is sudden. I know I should have said it sooner, but I've spent so many years watching life pass by, watching things I cared about slip through my fingers, and I don't want to lose this without trying. You matter to me more than you know, and I've always loved you, even when I was too quiet to say it." Her breath shook, tears filling her eyes before she could stop them. She had not expected this. She had not even allowed herself to imagine it, not after all the years, not after the paths their lives had taken. But something inside her broke open, something tender and fragile, something she had locked away for too long. "Keanu," she whispered again, but the rest of the words refused to come. Not yet. Not when her heart was spinning and her mind was tangled in old memories and new fears. He waited quietly, giving her space, though she could see how anxious he was, how vulnerable he felt, how terrified he was of hearing an answer that might fracture the fragile hope he had finally allowed himself to feel. She reached across the table, her hand shaking as she placed it gently over his. His hand was cold, trembling faintly beneath hers. She wanted to speak, to tell him everything she felt, everything she feared, everything she hoped for. But before she could form a single complete sentence, a voice suddenly called her name from behind. "Sandra." Her entire body stiffened. She turned slowly, her throat tightening as she saw the figure approaching their table, someone she had not expected to see tonight. Someone whose presence instantly changed the atmosphere, the tension, the emotional balance of the moment. Keanu's eyes widened slightly, though he did not move. He simply watched the figure approach, his heart sinking as the delicate moment he had crafted began to crumble beneath the weight of the unexpected interruption. And Sandra's lips parted in shock, because the person standing there held a truth she had not revealed to Keanu yet. A truth that might change everything he had just confessed. The cafe fell silent again, but this time, the silence was filled with dread, confusion, and a new fear that neither of them had been prepared for. And Sandra's next words would decide everything. The moment Sandra heard her name spoken from behind, her entire body felt as if the world had tilted slightly to one side, throwing her balance off even though she still sat firmly in her chair. Her fingers tightened instinctively around Keanu's hand, not because she meant to hold him back, but because she suddenly needed something solid, something grounding, something real to hold on to while the past and the present collided in a way she had not prepared for. The soft cafe lights flickered gently across her face as she turned, and the shadows revealed a man she had hoped she would not run into tonight, not when the air had been so fragile, not when Keanu had just opened his heart in a way that had shaken her to her core. The man approaching their table walked with careful steps, as if unsure whether he had just interrupted something private. There was a hesitant guilt in his eyes, mixed with a hope that clearly should not have been there. He wore a simple jacket, nothing flashy, and he carried a tiredness around him that showed he had been searching for her for a while. Sandra's breath trembled as memories rushed through her mind. Late-night conversations, promises made in difficult moments, a complicated connection she had never fully resolved. The weight of those memories pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe, making it harder to form words that could explain anything at all. Keanu watched quietly, though the tension in his body was impossible to hide. He did not pull his hand away from Sandra's, but he also did not grip it tighter. He simply held it with the same gentle steadiness he had always shown her, even when uncertainty sliced through him. Deep down, he already sensed that this man's presence was not accidental, sensed that whatever he represented would complicate everything Keanu had just confessed. But he did not speak, not yet. He wanted Sandra to have space, he wanted to trust her, but the fear in his chest began to grow roots. "I wasn't sure this was really you," the man said softly, stopping beside their table. "I've been trying to reach you. You weren't answering your phone." Sandra swallowed hard, her voice trapped somewhere between her throat and her heart. She forced a small, strained smile, the kind people wear when they are caught between kindness and discomfort. "I know, I'm sorry. I needed some air, needed some time to think." The man nodded slowly, his eyes shifting briefly to Keanu. There was recognition there, of course there was. Almost everyone recognized him. But this recognition was different. It held caution, maybe even concern, and Sandra saw it immediately. She felt a wave of heat rise up her neck, knowing she could not hide what this moment truly meant. "I didn't mean to interrupt," the man said, though his tone suggested he already feared he had stepped into something delicate. "But we still need to talk, don't we?" Keanu's jaw tightened slightly, though he kept his expression calm. He looked at Sandra, waiting for her to answer, waiting for her to explain who this man was, waiting for the truth that would either steady him or shatter him. Sandra took a slow, shaky breath. Part of her wanted to pull away, to run, to hide from this collision of emotions that felt too heavy for one night. But running had never helped her before. This was a moment she needed to face, even if it meant hurting someone she cared deeply about. "Yes," she finally said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "I know we need to talk." The man stepped closer, his expression softening with relief. "I'm glad I found you. I didn't want things left the way they were. I didn't want you thinking I didn't care." Keanu felt those words sink deep into his chest, sharp and cold. He wanted to stay calm, to stay composed, to give Sandra the space she deserved. But every second this man spoke, the more Keanu felt the fragile moment he had created slipping away from him like sand through his fingers. Sandra turned back to Keanu, her eyes full of apology, fear, and something he could not yet name. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words tangled together before they could form. She wanted to explain, she wanted to be honest, but honesty was complicated when emotions were layered and messy and unsteady. "Keanu," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I didn't expect this. I didn't want it to happen like this." He nodded gently, though his heart was pounding. "Then it's okay, just tell me what I need to know." The man shifted uncomfortably, realizing he was still standing. Sandra gestured quietly toward the empty chair at their table. He hesitated, looking between them, clearly unsure if he should sit. The tension in the air felt thick enough to hold in his hands. Finally, with a slow breath, he pulled out the chair and sat down, lowering himself cautiously as though stepping onto fragile ice. Silence stretched between the three of them, heavy and uncertain. Sandra stared at the table, her hands trembling slightly. She let go of Keanu's hand, and the moment she pulled away, he felt a hollow ache spread through his chest, though he hid it behind the steady calm he always wore. But inside, something had cracked. "His name is Michael," she said softly. "We've known each other for a while." Keanu's eyes darkened with a quiet pain that he tried to swallow down. He waited for more. He needed more. Michael leaned forward, his elbows resting carefully on the table. "We weren't sure what we were," he said gently. "Things were complicated. We were both carrying a lot from our pasts." Sandra nodded, her shoulders sinking as if weight were pressing down on them. "It wasn't simple. It never was." Keanu stayed silent. His stillness made the moment feel colder, more fragile. Michael exhaled slowly. "But I came here tonight because I want us to figure it out. I want a chance to make things right. I want Sandra to know she matters to me." Those words struck something deep, something sharp and unexpected. Sandra's breath hitched, and Keanu's heart clenched so hard it felt as if the air around him had thinned. Sandra's voice trembled as she asked, "Why now, Michael? After everything? After all the mixed signals? After all the times you walked away when I needed you to stay?" Michael's face filled with quiet regret. "Because losing you scared me more than admitting I loved you." The confession hit the table like a stone dropped into still water, sending shockwaves through the moment. Keanu felt his throat tighten. He had come here with his heart open, vulnerable and trembling, only to find himself sitting across from a man who was confessing at the exact moment he had finally spoken his truth. The weight of it all pressed against him, and for the first time that night, he felt a flicker of doubt. Doubt that he should have asked the question, doubt that the timing was right, doubt that he had any place in the space between Sandra and this man who had suddenly stepped forward with his own confession. Sandra placed her hands on her lap, her fingers twisting together with anxious tension. "Both of you chose tonight," she whispered. "Both of you chose this same moment to tell me how you feel, and I don't know what to do." Keanu's voice was soft, sincere, and heavy. "We don't expect you to decide anything right now." Michael nodded, though his eyes were full of longing. "I just want you to know where I stand." The cafe seemed to grow quieter, as if every sound faded beneath the weight of their emotions. Sandra looked from Keanu to Michael, her heart torn in ways she had hoped never to experience again. There was love, there was history, there was kindness, and there was fear all tangled together inside her, pulling her in two impossible directions. And then, just as Sandra began to open her mouth to speak, something unexpected happened. Her phone buzzed sharply on the table. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and her face went pale in an instant. Keanu leaned forward. "Sandra, what is it?" Her hand trembled as she held the phone, her voice barely holding together. It's about my sister," she whispered, her eyes widening in fear. "Something happened, I have to go now." And before either man could respond, she stood up so fast her chair nearly toppled. Keanu rose with her, Michael did too. The night that had been filled with love, confession, and uncertainty suddenly turned into something darker, something urgent, something dangerous. And Sandra, with tears filling her eyes, whispered the words that left both men frozen in shock. She said, "It's an emergency, and she told me not to come alone." The night seemed to shrink around them as Sandra stood frozen beside the table, her phone trembling in her shaking hand. Keanu and Michael exchanged a quick look, both of them sensing that the world had shifted again, but this time the shift felt sharp and frightening, like something dangerous had just slipped into the room without warning. The warm glow of the cafe lights suddenly felt dimmer. The soft chatter of other guests faded until all Sandra could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat in her ears. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, staring at the message on her phone as if the words themselves were pulling her into a place where she could not quite breathe. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself, but her voice cracked when she tried to speak. "She never sends messages like this," she whispered, clenching the phone tightly. "Never. Something is wrong, very wrong." Keanu stepped closer, his calm presence wrapping around her like a steady anchor. He did not touch her right away because he knew she was on the edge of breaking, and he wanted to give her the space to find her breath. But the look in his eyes carried a fierce, quiet determination, the kind of resolve he saved only for the people he loved. "We'll go with you," he said gently. "You won't face this alone." Michael nodded without hesitation, though worry creased his forehead. "Of course, tell us where she is. We'll go right now." Sandra tried to inhale, but her chest felt tight, as if fear had reached inside and wrapped itself around her lungs. She forced herself to speak, even though her voice trembled with every word. "She said she's at the old Riverside house, the one my family used to visit when we were younger, but we haven't been there in years. And she told me not to come alone." The weight of that sentence settled heavily over the table. Keanu felt it immediately, the strange warning, the unease wrapped in those few words, the sense that whatever waited at that house was not simple or safe. His jaw tightened as his protective instincts surged, and he reached out, placing a gentle hand on Sandra's arm. "That means we go together," he said softly but firmly. "No matter what." Michael stepped to her other side, his voice filled with worry. "Has she ever said anything like that before? Anything even close to this?" Sandra shook her head quickly, her eyes glistening. "Never. She's always calm, always gentle, but her message sounded scared. She said she didn't trust the situation. She said she felt like someone was watching the house." Those words made Keanu's expression darken. He remained quiet for a moment, thinking, analyzing, steadying himself so he could be steady for her. "We leave now," he finally said, his voice low and controlled. "We'll figure everything out on the way. The important thing is getting to her fast." They hurried out of the cafe together, the night air colder than before, biting against their skin as if warning them of the road ahead. Sandra wrapped her arms around herself tightly as she walked, her mind racing with fear. The old Riverside house had always felt safe when they were young. It was a place filled with laughter, summer memories, and long walks along the riverbank. But she had not stepped inside it for so long that the idea of going back now under these conditions sent chills through her. Michael walked slightly behind her at first, watching her carefully, as if afraid she might stumble under the weight of the fear she carried. Keanu walked beside her, close enough that if she faltered, he would catch her instantly. He kept glancing at her phone, as if hoping another message might appear, something that would explain the situation more clearly. But the screen remained dark, silent, and unsettling. As they reached the parking lot, Sandra slowed down, her breath uneven. "I don't know what we're walking into," she whispered. "I don't know why she's there. She said she went to meet someone, but she didn't say who." Those words made Keanu's steps halt for a brief moment. He looked at her carefully, his eyes filled with steady concern. "Did she tell you anything before this? Anything unusual? Anything that might help us understand?" Sandra hesitated, her brows tightening. "She mentioned someone calling her earlier today. She said it felt strange, like the person knew things they shouldn't know, but she didn't want to worry me, so she said she'd take care of it. I didn't think it was serious." Michael exhaled sharply. If someone was trying to scare her or lure her somewhere, then we need to assume this is more than just a misunderstanding. Keanu nodded thoughtfully, every part of him focused. "We'll be careful, but the most important thing is getting to her fast." They reached the cars. Keanu turned to Sandra. "Come with me, you're not driving like this." She opened her mouth to argue but closed it again almost immediately. She knew he was right. Her hands were shaking too much, her thoughts were tangled. She simply nodded, her voice too weak to object. Michael moved toward his car, planning to follow behind them, but before he opened his door, he glanced back at them with a worried expression. "Keep your phone on," he said to Sandra. "If anything changes, tell us right away." She nodded again, holding the device like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Inside Keanu's car, the engine's low hum filled the silence as they pulled out of the parking lot. Sandra stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur into long streaks of gold. Her hands twisted in her lap, her fingers cold despite the warm air blowing from the vents. The city passed by in a haze, but all she could see in her mind was her sister standing alone at that old house, frightened, waiting for her. Keanu kept one hand on the wheel and one close enough to touch hers if she needed him. He did not push her to speak. He did not rush her. He simply drove with a quiet strength, the kind that always made her feel safe even when her world felt unstable. After several minutes of silence, Sandra finally whispered, "Keanu, I'm scared. I'm really scared." He turned his head slightly, his voice soft and steady. "I know, but you're not alone. We'll find her, and we'll make sure she's safe." A small tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it quickly. "I feel like I should have seen this coming, like I should have known something was wrong." "That's not your fault," Keanu said gently. "Sometimes people hide their fears because they don't want to burden the ones they love. You couldn't have known." She closed her eyes, trying to hold back more tears. "Do you think she's all right?" Keanu hesitated before answering, choosing his words carefully. "I think she needs you, and we're going to get to her as fast as we can." The old riverside road appeared ahead, darker and narrower than Sandra remembered. Trees leaned over the gravel path, their branches twisting like shadows reaching out. The air felt colder here, heavier, filled with a strange tension that made Sandra grip the sides of her seat. Michael's headlights appeared behind them, following closely. The three of them moved slowly along the winding road until the old house finally came into view, its windows dark, its porch light flickering weakly, the wooden boards weathered and cracked from years of abandonment. Sandra inhaled sharply, a cold shiver running down her spine. "It looks different," she whispered. "So much colder." Keanu parked the car, his eyes scanning every inch of the surroundings. "Stay close to me," he said softly. "Don't walk ahead." Michael parked beside them and stepped out quickly, his eyes wide with worry. "There's no movement, no lights, nothing." Sandra stepped out of the car slowly, her legs unsteady. The air around the house felt thick with silence, the kind that warns rather than welcomes. She clutched her phone tightly, checking it again just in case her sister had sent another message. But the screen remained empty. She took one step toward the house, then another. But before she reached the porch, her phone buzzed sharply again. She froze. Her hands trembled as she lifted the screen. Her breath caught, and she whispered in a shaking voice, "This message, it's not from my sister." Keanu and Michael rushed to her side. She turned the phone so they could see. And the message on the screen read, "Come inside alone. If the two men follow you, we won't let her go." The message glowed on Sandra's screen like a warning carved into ice, cold and sharp, refusing to be ignored. For a long moment, she could not breathe. The air around her seemed to tighten, pressing in on her chest until her heartbeat felt trapped beneath her ribs. She stared at the words again, hoping they would somehow change, hoping she had misread them, but the message stayed the same, chilling her to the core. The quiet night around the old riverside house felt suddenly alive, as if shadows were watching, waiting for the wrong move. Keanu leaned in beside her, reading the message with a calmness that did not match the storm rising behind his eyes. His face darkened with concern, the muscles in his jaw tightening as he tried to make sense of the threat. He had expected something dangerous, something unsettling, but he had not expected this level of manipulation. Someone was controlling the situation from inside that house, someone who knew Sandra would come, someone who wanted her alone. He placed a gentle hand on her back, steady and grounding, even though inside he felt a rush of fear tearing through him. "You're not going in there by yourself," he said softly but firmly. "I won't allow that." Michael stepped closer, his face pale under the dim porch light. "This is a trap," he said in a low voice, struggling to stay calm. "They want to separate you from us. That means they're afraid of something, or they want you vulnerable." Sandra swallowed hard, her throat aching from the tension. "But my sister, what if they're telling the truth? What if she's really inside? What if she's scared or hurt or—" Her voice cracked, and she pressed a trembling hand against her forehead. I can't leave her. I can't let them hurt her. Keanu moved so he stood directly in front of her, forcing her to look into his steady, grounding eyes. Listen to me, he said, his voice firm but full of warmth. We're going to get her out. We're going to make sure she's safe, but you don't face threats alone, not ever, not tonight. Michael nodded quickly, stepping forward. We'll figure out a way to get in without risking you. There has to be another entrance, a back door, a window, something. But Sandra shook her head, her breath uneven. The message said if you follow me, they won't let her go. I can't take that risk, not when her life might be in danger. She took a step toward the porch, but Keanu immediately caught her arm. Not harshly, not roughly, but with a protective grip that made her stop. Don't, he whispered. Not until we know what we're dealing with. You can't walk into danger blind. She looked at him then, and the fear in her eyes pierced straight through him. Keanu, she's my sister. She's all I have. I can't stand here and do nothing. He exhaled slowly, his heart heavy. I know, and I'm not asking you to do nothing. I'm asking you to trust me, trust us. We'll find a way. Michael stepped closer, examining the house. The wooden boards creaked softly in the wind, the old porch railing swayed slightly, and the front windows were so dark that they felt like empty eyes staring back at them. He narrowed his eyes, scanning the corners, the shadows, every possible threat. I don't like how quiet it is, he murmured. If someone is inside watching her or watching us, they're not making mistakes. Sandra hugged herself tightly, her fingers digging into her arms. What if they're waiting for me to panic? What if this is all part of what they want? Keanu looked at her with deep tenderness. If they want you inside, he said quietly, then they need something from you. That means you have power, don't forget that. Michael nodded in agreement. They're trying to control you with fear. That means they're not as strong as they want you to believe. But Sandra felt the fear cutting through her anyway. Her sister's soft voice echoed in her memory, laughing with her, comforting her, telling her secrets late at night when they were young. The idea of her being trapped, scared, or alone inside that dark house made Sandra's heart tighten until she felt she could break. She took another step toward the porch, driven by love and desperation more than courage. Wait, Keanu said quickly, stepping in front of her. Look at me. She lifted her gaze, tears blurring her vision. If you walk through that door, he said softly, you walk into their world, not yours. They hold the rules. They decide what happens next. I need to make sure you don't walk in blind. We think first. We breathe. We plan. Sandra wiped her eyes with the back of her shaking hand. So what do we do? Keanu looked at Michael, and though neither man liked the situation, they both understood what had to happen. Michael nodded slowly. We have to stay close, he said. If they're watching, we can't be obvious, but we can't leave you alone either. Keanu turned back to her. If you go inside, he said carefully, we'll stay out of sight. Close enough to help, far enough not to trigger whatever threat they made. Sandra hesitated, but what if they see you? Keanu placed a gentle hand over hers. We'll be careful, I promise. Michael added, and if anything feels wrong, you call out, even one sound, will come in immediately. The fear in Sandra's chest loosened just enough for her to breathe. Not fully, not calmly, but enough to take one small, steadying step toward the porch. She nodded slowly. All right, she whispered, but I'm terrified. Keanu brushed a tear from her cheek with a tenderness that made her heart tighten. Being scared doesn't mean you're weak, he said softly. It means you care, and we're right here. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the worn wooden porch, the boards groaning under her weight. A cold breeze swept across her skin, stirring the small hairs on her arms. She reached for the doorknob, her hand trembling violently. The old metal felt icy, colder than it should have been, as if the entire house had been drained of warmth long before they arrived. Keanu and Michael crouched near the side of the house, staying low, watching her with intense focus. Sandra swallowed hard, turned the knob slowly, and pushed the door open. A wave of cold air brushed past her, carrying a faint smell she could not name, dust, old wood, and something else, something faintly sour that made her stomach twist. The house was dark inside, the shadows thick, swallowing the little light that spilled through the doorway. Her voice caught in her throat. Hello, she whispered shakily. Is anyone here? Her words disappeared into the hollow darkness. No answer, no movement. She stepped inside, the floor creaking loudly under her weight. Keanu clenched his jaw, watching every second, his muscles coiled and ready to move at the slightest sign of danger. Michael scanned the house's perimeter, searching for any hint of movement, any sign of a threat. Sandra took another step inside. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it echoing in her ears. And then, her phone buzzed again. She lifted it with trembling hands. A new message appeared. It contained only 2 words. 2 words that made her blood run cold. And as she read them, her lips parted in shock. The message said, "Turn around." She froze. Outside, Keanu's breath caught. Michael's eyes widened. And Sandra, shaking violently, slowly turned toward the doorway. Where a shadowed figure now stood between her and the exit, Sandra's breath caught as soon as she turned, her heart freezing mid-beat as she saw the dark shape blocking the doorway. For a moment she could not tell if the figure was a man or a shadow created by the dim light slipping in through the old porch lamp. Everything about it felt wrong. The stillness, the silence, the way it stood just inside the frame as if it had been waiting for her to turn around. She felt her pulse jump violently, her hands trembling so hard her phone nearly slipped from her grasp. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words tangled painfully in her throat, refusing to leave. Figure did not move at first. It simply existed, as if its presence alone was meant to control the moment. Then slowly it took a single step forward, and Sandra felt her legs weaken beneath her, the fear sinking into her bones like cold water. The dim light caught the features of the person now, just enough to show a face half hidden beneath a hood, eyes sharp and watchful, lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line. The stranger's expression was calm in a way that made Sandra's stomach twist. Calmness in a moment like this was not natural. It was deliberate, practiced. Outside, Keanu tensed instantly. From his spot hidden under the porch window, he could see the silhouette inside the house now. He moved slightly, ready to rush in, but he forced himself to stay still because Sandra had not called out, had not signaled danger, and any sudden move might provoke something worse. He hated every second of it. His breath grew tight as he watched her, his hands curled into fists as he fought the instinct to protect her immediately. Every protective instinct screamed at him to break the door down, but he held himself back for her sake. Michael crouched near the side wall, his eyes darting between the windows and the shadows. He whispered, barely audible, "Who is that? Who's in there with her?" But Keanu didn't answer. He couldn't. All his focus was on Sandra, on every small movement she made, on every tremor in her posture. Inside the house, Sandra forced herself to speak. Her voice came out fragile, barely above a whisper. "Who are you? Where is my sister?" The stranger tilted his head slightly, studying her with unsettling calm. "You came. Good," he said, his voice low and smooth, without anger, without urgency, almost polite. The politeness made it worse somehow, as if he saw no danger in what he was doing, no wrong in what he had forced her into. "My sister," Sandra repeated, her voice steadier this time. "Tell me where she is." The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped further into the room, closer to her, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Sandra instinctively stepped back, her spine hitting the edge of a dusty table behind her. The wooden surface vibrated softly under her touch, the old furniture shifting slightly from disuse. She tightened her grip on her phone, her fingers icy with fear. Finally, the stranger spoke. "She's safe for now." Those words made Sandra's stomach drop. Safe for now, not safe, not protected, not unharmed. Safe for now meant he had control. It meant he believed he could change that safety at any moment. Sandra's breath shook, her palms sweated. She felt the pressure of the danger pressing into her mind like rising water. "I want to see her," she said, forcing strength into her voice. "Right now." The stranger's lips curled slightly, almost like a mockery of a smile. "You will," he said, "but first you and I need to talk." Sandra shook her head immediately. "No, I'm not here to play games." His smile faded, replaced by an expression colder and emptier than before. "This is not a game," he said softly. "This is a warning." Outside, Keanu took a silent step toward the door, unable to hold back any longer. Michael grabbed his arm and whispered harshly, "Wait. If they see you, it puts her in more danger." Keanu's jaw tightened. "She's already in danger." Michael shook his head. "But right now she's alive, that's what matters. We stay hidden until she needs us." Keanu's breath trembled with restraint, but he forced himself to stay still. It felt like torture. Back inside, the stranger stopped walking and folded his arms, standing just a few steps away from Sandra now. "Do you know why you were told not to come alone?" he asked. Sandra nodded slowly. "Because you wanted control, because you wanted to isolate me." He chuckled quietly, and the sound was unsettlingly soft. Not quite. We didn't want you alone. We wanted your men outside, close enough to interfere, far enough to hesitate. Sandra's heart twisted. Why? For what reason? He stepped closer again, and she felt the coldness of his presence wrap around her like a shadow. Because this situation is bigger than you, he said. Bigger than your sister, bigger than all three of you. She shook her head, her fear shifting into anger. I don't understand. His eyes narrowed slightly. You don't have to understand, not yet. She stepped backward again, but the table behind her blocked her path. Where is she? She demanded, her voice trembling with both fury and terror. The stranger studied her for a long moment before speaking. Your sister is in the basement, he said softly, waiting. Sandra's breath hitched, her knees weakened. The basement, she whispered. Yes, he replied. She went down there willingly. She thought she was helping someone. She thought she was doing the right thing. Sandra shook her head, panic rising. Take me to her. The stranger tilted his head again, as if analyzing something invisible. I will, he said slowly, but only after you listen to what I brought you here to hear. Sandra's pulse quickened. I don't care what you want, I want my sister. His expression darkened. If you don't listen, he said, his voice cold as stone, you won't get to her in time. Sandra froze. In time, she repeated, her voice cracking. What do you mean? He leaned forward slightly. There is someone else in this house, he whispered. Someone you know. Sandra's breath stopped. Outside, Keanu straightened sharply, sensing her shift in energy. Michael whispered, What's happening? What did he say? Inside, the stranger took a slow breath, watching Sandra's stunned face. Someone you trusted, he continued. Someone who has been hiding from you, someone who is tied to all of this. Sandra's hands trembled violently now, tears welled in her eyes. Who? She whispered. The stranger smiled faintly, and the expression made Sandra's blood turn to ice. He stepped aside, clearing the doorway behind him. And from the darkness of the hallway, another figure stepped forward. A figure whose face made Sandra gasp, drop her phone, and stumble back in disbelief. Because standing there, ghost-pale and wide-eyed, was someone Sandra knew better than almost anyone. Someone she never expected to see. Someone she had trusted. And someone who whispered her name in a broken voice. Sandra, I'm sorry,